projects and business. In recent years, there's been a lot of interest by the business community in free software, both using free software, helping to develop it, selling it, making money out of it in various ways. So this lecture is all about the ways that the business community interacts with free software projects and the ways that people can make money out of free software projects. Okay, so first thing is you need to work out what is the aim for utilising the free software project by the business. Is it that the business is asking, how can I take advantage of FOSS? Or is it that the business is asking, how can I make money from the FOSS product? So some businesses, as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, see a FOSS product as a resource. So they use the FOSS product just to enable them to get a good quality piece of software at a lower price or with better features or better support or whatever reason they might have than some alternative product. Or it might be that the program that they are using, a free software program, there is no equivalent proprietary program. There might be no commercial program that's equivalent. Other businesses ask the question, how can I make money from a FOSS product? So how can they sell the FOSS product or incorporate the FOSS product as part of their hardware product line or software product line? How can they sell support for it? How can they make money through advertising or other mechanisms? But the first thing for the business to do is to try and work out what the aim is. Are they trying to support its development? Are they trying to make money by monetizing the product in some way? Or are they trying to take advantage of the existence of the product to make their business operate better in some way? Okay, the most common use of free software in business is very simple. It's in-house use. And so the business downloads and uses a piece of free software within the business without contributing. They just take advantage of its existence, and that's extremely common. It's also quite common that companies develop software in-house themselves. Some estimates have put the majority of software in the world is in fact in-house developed software. A lot of it's actually in COBOL and other ancient languages. And sometimes those companies may decide to release those products as free software for various reasons. So why do companies use pieces of free software for in-house use? Why do they download some product like Samba or download something like Ubuntu and use it in-house? Well, one reason can be the lower licensing costs. Now there's two types of licensing costs that might be lower. One is the actual money you might have to pay. So in the case of free software, usually there is a zero licensing cost. So that means you don't have to pay anything. But it also saves you money in another way because it means you don't have any administrative overhead of tracking how many copies of the software you have. When you run a piece of proprietary software, very often there is an overhead for the business in tracking exactly how many of your users, how many employees in your business are using each piece of software, and because you then have to, through that tracking, make sure you're complying with whatever licenses you have for that software. Otherwise, your business may be audited by something like the Business Software Alliance. All of that adds overhead to running your business, the administrative cost of doing that tracking. By using free software, you avoid that overhead because you're not accountable to anyone. You don't have to tell anyone how many licenses you're using. Another major reason why companies may use free software in-house is to avoid vendor lock-in. Who can tell me what vendor lock-in is?
It's where you have to use one company, you start using one company's product and it's pretty difficult to change what you've done previously to a different one.
That's right, exactly. So the answer is that if you start using a particular software product or hardware product, particularly in this case software, you start using a software product and then you use it for say 2 or 3 years, and then a lot of your data is then stored in a format that is specific to that product. Your workflows, your tools, etc. develop up around that product. And then what happens if that product changes? What happens if that product goes away? What happens if the price for that product rises? The annual licensing fee might double. It might be that in future, It is only available in a particular form. It might go from a site license to a per user license. The company producing the software might go out of business. Vendor lock-in refers to the fact that there is a cost in switching from one software product to another. There is the cost in switching between products because you have to retrain your employees, you have to change all your data over to the new format, you have to change your workflow and practices, your internal business practices to match the new product. So in what ways does free software reduce the risk of vendor lock-in? What is the key factor that reduces vendor lock-in with free software?
You have access to the source code.
Yes, which means
Data is stored in open formats.
data is often stored or usually stored in open formats indeed, yes, but
having access to the source code means that you have the freedom to either make future changes to the code
Right.
yourself or,
That's right.
or employ somebody else to do so.
exactly,
Engage with somebody
right.
else.
So it means that if, for example, the vendor who wrote the software originally went out of business, if it was a free software product, then you would have the option, you don't have to do this, but you would have the option to continue development yourself and maintenance, compile it up for new systems, port it to a new architecture, make enhancements or bug fixes. And if you don't have the skills in-house to do it, you could employ external programmers to enhance it and continue development, because those external programmers will have the resources to be able to do that because you have the source code. So that means you have the ability to be able to continue the development yourself or pay somebody to develop it, because with it, the source code is the basic enabling tool that allows you to do that. But there's something else as well. There's something else with vendor lock-in. It's very common that in particularly large software packages, most of the cost of the software package is in support, not the purchase of the software. The licensing for the software might be quite a small cost, but the support contracts to provide a guaranteed level of support might be more expensive. How do support contracts, how does the support situation vary with free software as compared to proprietary software?
Free choice,
Right?
multiple providers in most cases.
You have multiple providers. You have the possibility of there being multiple support providers for a particular product. Why are there multiple support providers for free software products?
Because there could be the users and there could
Yes.
be user groups.
Right? What else is there?
No.
There's some other factor as well. If say the person who makes the software offers support, and their support is very, very expensive. Say they were charging $1 million a year to support some free software product, right? What will happen?
Someone else will support it cheaper.
Somebody else will offer cheaper support. They can offer the cheaper support because that alternative support provider also has the source code and the basic tool you need to have two things to be able to support a product. You have to have access to the source codes, you have the possibility of fixing bugs, and you have to have the knowledge and skills to understand the source code, right? So another support company, if they have sufficiently good engineers, they could learn to understand the source code and offer a cheaper support deal than the first company. That tends to mean the price of support of free software products tends to be lower than for proprietary products, because if it's too high, somebody else will come along and offer cheaper support, just through competition, because they see an opportunity to offer to the market a cheaper product, and they can see that the customers of the first company are being gouged in some way. They're overcharging. So you have the possibility for new support. Now, you also have the possibility to self-support, right? With free software, because again you have the source code, it is often possible to hire your own engineers and develop your own in-house expertise to understand the product and to support it yourself. And a lot of larger companies do that. If they're particularly dependent on a piece of software, if that software is absolutely essential for their business, it's quite common for them to then hire one or more engineers whose job it is to be familiar with that product and to provide top quality in-house support. And that in-house support is then accountable to the internal management of the company, which lowers the risk of using that software because the internal management then has the ability to assign the appropriate level of resources to supporting the product. Whereas if it's supported externally, you may not have the same degree of control and be able to ensure that enough resources are put into the support and to ensure that the people providing the support have the right skills. And in fact, that's one of the main ways that some free software developers end up having free software as their career. Yep.
What about for products that are partly open source and partly proprietary,
Right.
such as IBM National Software Architect?
Okay, yes, I've never used IBM Rational, so I don't know it in particular. But the question was about products that are partly rational, partly open and partly proprietary. If the main part of the software you're interacting with is open, right, it's free software, then it's not a problem. If, however, the proprietary part is absolutely essential to your business, then vendor lock-in is perfectly possible. And it might be that you can get stuck. Now, in that case, it might be that even though it's an essential part for your business, it might be a relatively small piece of software, a plug-in or a bridge to another piece of software, in which case perhaps you would judge that if that software was no longer provided, you might be able to replace that one component. And it might be a smaller task to replace that one component than to start from scratch and replace the whole project. So that might make it still viable, and it might be better than using completely proprietary software. But that is quite common. It is quite common these days that larger pieces of free software might have some proprietary add-ons. And that does open up the possibility of vendor lock-in occurring again. And vendor lock-in can be dangerous to businesses in the long term. Okay. The ability to customize the application can also be important. It might be that the application is almost exactly what you need, but not quite. It might be that you have unique needs in your business that other people don't have, and it might be that there aren't sufficient numbers of users of this product that need the features that you need to justify anyone developing those. But you can develop them yourself because you have the basic source code to start with. You can add enhancements to that basic free software product that meet the particular needs of your business. But then you've got to watch out for something. If you do make in-house enhancements to the project, what's the problem?
Licensing.
Licensing, yes, it could be licensing issues. That most free software licenses would allow for in-house enhancements, right? But there's something else I'm particularly thinking of.
Back.
Sorry?
You have to contribute back or whatever.
Right, you may have to contribute back, or you may want to contribute back. Why would you want to contribute back, even if it's not required? I mentioned it in the last lecture.
Reduce the maintenance costs.
Reduce the maintenance costs, exactly. If you add an enhancement to the product, if it's a small enhancement, the addition of a new template or the addition of some new tutorial or similar, it may be no problem. But if it's a larger enhancement, then when new versions of the product come out that fix bugs or add new features, you then have to make sure that your enhancements also work with the new version, because you might want to use that new version. You don't want to be stuck with the 2009 version when it's 2015 and there's some great new features in the new version. So in that case, it could be that the cost of developing the customization is relatively small, but the cost of the ongoing maintenance and maintaining the expertise necessary to maintain those changes could be quite high. In that case, it might be worthwhile contributing those changes back to the free software community so that they get integrated into the upstream version, and the maintainers of the free software community they do the maintenance for you. They continue to keep your feature in the code because it's easier to maintain a piece of code as a whole. When changes are added to the project, they're generally added small bit, piece by piece, though each of those additions can be done in such a way as to not break the additional features that you've added. Whereas if you do it in a big lump and you wait every 2 or 3 years for a major release, and then you try to integrate a previous change, it might take months of effort for one of your engineers to bring it up to date to make it work in the new release. It might even take longer than developing the feature in the first place, depending on the complexity of the change you've made. Okay, so the ability to customize is certainly a big advantage for FOSS use, for in-house use for businesses. So let's have a look at the different revenue models. How can a business make some money out of free software? How can they actually generate business revenue out of free software projects? And there's all sorts of ways that people do this. Now, I've broken them down into these 5 broad categories. So there's lots of examples of each of these categories out there. There's also other ways that people have made money out of free software, many different means, but most of them fall into these 5 broad categories. Let's have a look at them. Probably the biggest one is hardware vendors, where free software can help sell the hardware. All right? A piece of hardware, take something like this phone. If this phone had no software on it, what use is it?
Paperweight.
It's a paperweight, right? You could use it to hold down a piece of paper. You couldn't do much else with it without a piece of software. Okay? This computer, without any software on it at all, is completely useless.
Hand-to-hand combat.
That's right, indeed. In fact, there's a whole website on uses for ThinkPads, as little boats, as holding your lunch tray, and there's a great joke website on innovative uses for your ThinkPad that don't involve software. But anyway, most people want to use their laptops and actually run software on it, right? So the software is what makes a piece of hardware useful, but the hardware is often quite expensive. So hardware vendors want to make sure that as much software as possible is available for their hardware. Well, at least some vendors do. Other vendors have different attitudes, but a lot of vendors want lots of software available to make their hardware more attractive to people to buy it. So there's also some key pieces of software. If you're selling a server, there are some key pieces of software. There is a server operating system, there's a web server, there might be a file server. There's some certain pieces of software that you expect to be able to run on a server. So the person who makes the server hardware wants to make sure that the most popular pieces of software run on their particular hardware. So what do? They do several different things to try to make sure that their hardware works with popular pieces of free software. What do you think they do? Imagine you're the vendor, you make some hardware. What would you do to try to make sure that free software, some important piece of free software, work on your hardware? Test it? Yes, you could test it yourself. And what if it doesn't work?
Sponsor it.
You could speak to them, right? Yes, but there's some other techniques that are even more common. That's an important one, and a lot of vendors do test with the free software, but there's some more common techniques.
Contribute to the free software.
Contribute to the free software project, how?
If you require drivers for your particular hardware,
Yes, but imagine you're a manager. You're a manager who doesn't know anything about any programming languages or anything, right? You just want to make sure that your piece of hardware works well with this piece of free software, right? Sorry?
Free hardware to...
Yes, contribute free hardware to the people who develop the software, right? That's a very, very common technique. Give away some of your hardware. How much does this laptop cost?
Depends who you are.
Right, well, a few $1,000s, $2,000 or $3,000, something like that, a few $1,000s typically, a laptop like this, okay? How many hours of programmer time would $2,000 or $3,000 buy? A few days, maybe? A day? Gosh, ANU's paid well. So a few days maybe, okay, a few days. So, if you were making sure a piece of software worked on this laptop, how much would it cost your business to make sure that some piece of free software worked on this laptop?
Heaps.
It might cost you 6 months of an engineer's time. How much is that going to cost you? It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on who the engineers are with on costs and all those types of things. It might be $30,000, if you can outsource it to some country where salaries are a bit cheaper. It just depends, right? But it's a lot more than the cost of the laptop. So what do businesses tend to do? They find somebody who is doing good development on that software and they send them a free laptop, right? They send them a free mobile phone, they send them a free server. I've got a whole room full of this stuff at home, stuff that companies have sent me. Sometimes they don't even tell me it's coming. Just this big package arrives on the door, right? Containing some great big server, and I plug it in and I play with it. What do? I'm a free software developer. I'm enthusiastic about my project. What do I do when some new bit of hardware arrives that might be able to run my project?
Put your software on, see what happens.
I make it work.
Pull it apart.
Right? I start pulling it to pieces, of course, yes. That's right. But I often work to make it work well. Right? Is that good value for the business? It's very good value. My time, if they were consulting me to pay me consulting rates to do this, would cost a fortune. But if they just send me a piece of hardware, right, as a weekend project, I may make it work. And probably I will make it work better because I'm the author of the software. Probably I'll make it work faster because I'm very familiar with the software and I can probably solve the problems more quickly. So companies, by sending the hardware across to a known developer, can get very good value for money. But it is a bit hit and miss. Some companies give away thousands of pieces of hardware, right? Especially the small devices, PDAs and things. Some of the little small PDAs that they want it to work well with Linux, they give away thousands of them to developers, and sometimes it doesn't catch on. Sometimes all these developers say, hey, that's cool. They put it on their desk and don't touch it again, right? That's fine. It's only cost the company a couple of $100, right? They get the devices cheap. They make the devices. They probably make them for, $2 in some factory somewhere, right, or whatever, okay? It's very, very cheap to them. So that even if a small number of the developers actually do some active development, then that can really help, okay? It tends not to happen as much with really high-end hardware, because the high-end hardware is expensive, and the number of customers for the high-end hardware, I'm talking about million-dollar supercomputers, right? The number of customers tend to be quite low, so if you give away the hardware to all of your potential customers, then you've got a bit of a problem, right? No one will end up buying it, they'll just use the free ones, okay? So depends on the level, but businesses often do give away the hardware. What else do they do? There's another really common thing that is done by businesses when they want a piece of free software to work well with their hardware. Donations, yes, donations are quite common, either of hardware, sometimes of money. There's an even more common one.
Pay somebody.
Pay somebody, hire someone, right? Contact somebody in the free software community who's developing for that project, offer them a job. Say, hi, I've noticed you've been doing great work on this project, you've been committing lots of stuff for 2 or 3 years in your own time, how would you like to work on this full time? Sure. A whole lot of free software developers would say, great, yes, can I work from home? Yes. Do I get a company car? Yes, hey, I'm in, right? This sort of thing happens quite commonly, particularly in the dot-com boom at the end of the 90s, but it still happens today. And if you're a well-known free software developer, you get job offers quite frequently. But it depends on the project. It depends whether the project is of strong interest to companies who build hardware, right? And are interested in then putting money into developers, and they do this as a way to make their hardware more attractive to other users. Okay, so that's hardware vendors. Selling support, right? You can sell your expertise as software support. Okay, who can think of an example of this? Who can't think of an example of this? Anyone think of an example of a company that sells support for some piece of free software?
Canonical do it for...
Canonical do it for Ubuntu, the software you're using in the lab, right? You can choose to pay Canonical to get guaranteed support, phone line support, guaranteed email support, etc. What's another one? Red Hat. Red Hat software that makes Red Hat Linux. They sell support. In fact, that's their primary source of income, I believe. I'd have to have a look on their financials on their website. They're a public company. But I believe their primary source of income is selling support. So they sell, I think, tens of millions of dollars worth of support each year, support contracts, particularly to businesses who want to be absolutely certain that at midnight on Sunday, when there's some critical business thing going on and their service stops, they have somebody they can ring who will answer the phone. And what is the principal thing they want to be sure of about the person at the end of the phone who answers the call?
Not going to hang up.
Well, okay, not going to hang up. Yes, something else.
Can solve the problem.
They can solve the problem. They have to be competent. They have to be knowledgeable. They have to know the product really, really well. Okay? How do you pick a support provider? How do you choose them, right, in order to be sure that they have the appropriate knowledge so that when you need them, they actually can help?
There's a chance if they wrote it, that they might know something.
There's a good chance that if they wrote the software, they might know something about it and be able to help you, right? Or if they pay some of the developers who work on it, or if they contribute to the software, right? It's more likely they'll be able to help, okay? So that's partly why free software developers are in demand for companies like Red Hat and others that provide support, because they know that their reputation as a good support provider will be enhanced if they have the authors of the software working for them. They know that the customers are going to be happier if they get very good answers back, and they'll tend to get very good answers from the people who write the software, right? Because they'll know exactly, as long as they're personable people and they've got good manner. Some people who write software, you know, might just tell all the users to go away. They don't like users, right? You've got to make sure that they're actually engineers who actually have a good relationship with customers. But yes, you sell your expertise, you have to have that expertise. That usually means you need to be a contributor to the software to gain the expertise on how to support it. And that's partly why free software developers end up with jobs. They end up providing support for that software or related software as part of their job. Okay? Proprietary extensions, this is one that was mentioned just a minute ago. Who can think of a, or one or two or three proprietary extensions to free software that is sold? That one with Eclipse, I think, or
Rational,
Rational, or the Rational one, yes. There's there was a Mappy Exchange connector from Novell that Novell had was sold at one stage. There are various connectors for other source code management systems that have been sold as proprietary add-ons. There have been proprietary add-ons for word processors, for all sorts of different systems. So the way this is often done is that the company or that produces the software or pays the programmers to produce the software give away the majority of the software, and they do that in order to establish a user base. So they get a whole lot of users using it. Then there might be some key feature that business users tend to need, and maybe they'll keep that one back and they'll sell that extra feature. Right? It's got to be done carefully though. Right? Why does it need to be done carefully?
Be careful not to burn people who were trusting you up to a point. And then
that's right. Be
feel
careful
like
that you don't burn people with vendor lock-in. There's some other things you need to be careful of as well. What if that feature is a very attractive feature, but is actually quite a small piece of code?
somebody else writes it.
Somebody else will write that feature and release it as free software. Right? So if you have a proprietary add-on, and you're selling that and your business is relying on that proprietary add-on, that business model is a little bit unstable because there's a lot of smart programmers out there, and somebody might decide that they can write a plugin for that piece of free software as well that achieves the same end. It might even be that their plugin is better than yours. Right? There's a lot of very good programmers out there, and they might be able to produce something better, in which case your business model has just disappeared. So, that may mean that you need to keep innovating. You need to make better software, better plugin all the time in order to keep ahead. Or you might make sure the price is low enough that there isn't much of an incentive to do this. So there's lots of different business ways of doing this, and it's sort of a mixture of the free and proprietary software world. Right? I prefer to keep everything free software myself, and I think ethically it's better to keep things free software, but there are quite a few companies that do follow this model. This semi-proprietary, some portion of it proprietary, some of it free. And it's important to understand that when you're using a free software product, if they're proprietary add-ons, that the rules of that add-on may be different from the rules, or will be different from the rules of the core software. Okay? Dual licensing. You might offer an alternative license for a price. Now that one's interesting. This is what I call the sort of the antidote or the vaccine type approach, right? And can anyone think of an example of that?
MySQL, up until they were acquired by
MySQL, indeed. Yes.
QT.
Sorry. QT, indeed. They're the two best known examples. Yep. So QT is a library that provides a graphical user interface library. It provides the widgets to create very nice graphical user interfaces. And for a long time, a lot of companies are using the Qt library to create proprietary applications. Now, Qt was released as free software, right? The Qt licensing has changed over the years, so I'm generalizing a little bit here. But at least at one point in time, Qt is a free software released under the GPL at one point, and a lot of companies wanted to use the Qt library to create a proprietary application. Now, they couldn't do that because the copyleft provision in the GPL means that they would have to release their application as GPL software as well. So, they could go to the makers of Qt, a company called Trolltech in Norway, and they could buy a commercial license for Qt buy the right to use Qt without following the GPL. Right? So they buy an exemption, basically, from the GPL provisions for the use of that library. And that's quite a popular business model in the free software world. It was similar in the MySQL database. The MySQL database is an extremely popular database system. Lightweight, fast, very popular in web applications. But the license they have on it, they explicitly say that if you're using the database in a commercial context as part of a commercial application, then you have to buy a commercial license. If you're using it as in a free software application, you don't have to buy a commercial license. So the free software world can use MySQL, but lots of companies bought a license to MySQL and paid for it in order to use it in an application that was a non-free software application. And there was some controversy surrounding that because of the clarity or the lack of clarity over exactly what was and wasn't considered a commercial application of the software, right? If you're using it to drive some website that sold tickets, is that a commercial application? And MySQL developers thought yes. Some other people thought that, well, that isn't really within the scope of the GPL, etc. And that, of course, leads to long debates. And those debates, you can go and have a look at them on the MySQL and other mailing lists to see those debates over the years. Okay, so that's dual licensing. Advertising. A common method of deriving revenue is to use free software to drive advertising revenue. How would you do that? How would you do that on a small scale?
Banner on your website.
Put a banner on your website. Indeed, put some banner ads on your free software website, and every time somebody clicks on one of those banner ads, you earn a few cents or a few dollars or whatever it is that you earn for banner ads. I've never had banner ads on my site, so I don't know how much you earn. But some people earn quite good money, apparently. Some thousands of dollars a year through banner ads.
After 3 years, I got within an ace of $50 US from Google. Got
Very
so,
good.
So close. That's the threshold before they'll pay you.
Oh, they won't pay you less than
They
$50.
won't pay you to hit $50, yeah.
Okay, right. I
Within
wasn't
10
aware of
cents or
that. Okay. So some organisations actually derive large amounts of revenue through advertising, and we'll see an example of that later in the lecture. Okay, so let's look at some of these in more detail. The server vendors. There are huge contributions made by the major vendors, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Intel and Sun, and it's very often a significant factor in making a sale. So they're trying to sell their server, some big HP server, IBM server, Sun server, and those servers might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the person buying it particularly wants to run PostgreSQL, Apache, Samba, whatever application on that. And these different vendors will all be trying to make the sale. They'll all be going along with the salespeople in their business suits and saying, you should buy our server because, and one of the becauses they will give is that this application, this free software application you want to run, runs best on our hardware. Right? And they'll try and prove that with all sorts of dodgy benchmarks. Okay, they'll try and show benchmark numbers, they'll try and show that the reliability is highest in our hardware. So that provides motivation for the hardware vendor to ensure that it does work best on their, at least it works best on these benchmarks anyway, but try to actually show that it does work well on their particular piece of hardware. It's also quite common that these server vendors port their proprietary middleware applications. Anyone think of a middleware application? It's called middleware.
JBoss.
Sorry?
JBoss.
JBoss, yes, that's a middleware application. Any others?
Message broker.
Message broker, okay, yes. There's lots of different middleware applications, and it's quite common that these large vendors port their middleware applications to free operating systems like Linux or BSD. When they do that, does that involve any contributions back to the community? Sometimes it does, actually. What type of contributions do you think happen out of a vendor porting a middleware application?
They might find some bugs in
They might find some bugs or some limitations. One of the most common ones, well-known ones, was various efforts to port things like Oracle database to make it run well on Linux. They found they needed a lot of enhancements to things like the direct I/O, disk access. They needed enhancements to things like the threading library. So they then hired developers and paid people to contribute to those free software libraries and to contribute to the kernel in order to make sure that their middleware application or their database or whatever it was ran better on Linux. So even companies who are porting proprietary middleware apps to a free software operating system often end up spending large amounts of development time making that operating system better, which benefits everybody, because in order to make their application run well, they have to improve the underlying system. And you may find that the authors of the underlying free software packages reject the change if the change is really specific to that application. They'll only accept the change if the change benefits a significant number of users. So that provides a motivation for the vendor to make the change in a way that benefits as many users as possible, because they want their change to get in. Because if their change doesn't get in, their proprietary application won't work well on that platform, which means they won't sell their proprietary application to users of that platform. Right? And that's very, very common. Things like database vendors. They all want to make sure that their database works really well on the popular free operating systems. Otherwise, given that those free operating systems are now extremely widely used, massive penetration in the server operating system market, they just won't sell their proprietary applications unless it works well. Now, some of them have gone as far as to create their own fork of the free software operating system distribution. Oracle has done that. They've got sort of the Oracle Linux, and they've got support. They have now turned into a support company. Oracle started out just working on Linux to make Linux work well with the Oracle database. They've morphed into creating their own Oracle Linux, and from there they've actually created a support service where they are now selling support for Oracle Linux in competition to other companies like Red Hat. So where their business started as just trying to support their proprietary application, now they've become a free operating system vendor in and of themselves, competing with other support vendors in the same way as I described earlier, where you can compete on price or on quality, compete on knowledge of the operating system.
Has anybody bought Oracle Linux yet? Like, has anybody? Have they got real
Anyone here? You mean anyone in the world?
Real customers? Have they got genuine customer base?
I would guess they've got. I don't know how many they've got.
They have a virtual machine and they only support Oracle products running on their virtual Linux.
Okay.
There you go.
Yep.
So you have to, if you want support, you have
You've
to
got
run
it.
it on their virtual
Right.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
I see.
and it's free.
Right.
Okay. So there's also embedded vendors. There's lots of support for FOSS projects by device makers. The makers of things like NAS products, network attached storage, gadget vendors, make little GPS products or ebooks or whatever. Those often support the development of FOSS in a number of ways. One is they may buy a pre-packaged embedded Linux distribution and support for that. That money goes to the company that makes this pre-packaged embedded Linux distribution. That pays the developers of that company to enhance that distribution, and as it's free software, everyone receives those benefits, right? So even if the device maker themselves isn't putting development effort into the underlying free software, the fact that they may want to pay for support for that leads to more development of more free software. Okay? Selling support, this is the classic FOSS business, really pioneered by a company called Cygnus. And there's a history of the Cygnus, their support business, in a book called Open Sources, edited by Chris DeBona. Very good book. It's got basically a series of essays by key people in the free software movement. And there's a story in there from the person who founded Cygnus, talks all about how he got started with the support business, and it's a very interesting read. So have a look at it. So this sort of support business, there's lots of companies that now provide support. Some of them are 1 or 2 person consulting companies that provide support to local businesses or within their country. Others of them are large businesses which might have hundreds or thousands of employees, even tens of thousands of employees, and their business model is to sell support, to provide some sort of guaranteed level of support to their customers for pieces of free software. The different types of variants tends to be either a packaged support system, where you sell a certain amount of support as a package, like a yearly contract or a certain number of hours of phone or email support, so as a support package. and that tends to be sold in bulk to sort of thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers. Or larger services, some companies offer larger contracts, guaranteed service level agreements, or they might provide specialised modification of the software, contracting. They might provide services for installation, large installations and deployments. If you're going to be installing a free operating system on 100,000 desktops across your international organisation, you might pay some external support company to, first of all, to spec out how much it's going to cost, what's involved, to plan the deployment of the free software, to plan the training of the users, etc. And so that then would be a largish contract where the large company would then have a contract with the company that wants to deploy the free software, and that might last a year or two within some fixed term to complete a particular service like the deployment. Okay, and as I mentioned before, the support tends to avoid lock-in. Because the source is available, anyone could offer support, and the key in choosing a support provider as a business is choosing somebody with the right skills. To do that, you have to have the types of research skills that you've been learning in these labs. So if you work for a business, you're trying to choose a support provider, go and have a look and see whether that support provider has engineers who are contributing to the software. Read through the mailing list, read through the commit messages, etc., and see if they actually are contributing and really understand the software. And if they don't seem to, ask them to provide proof that they have a good understanding of the software. And if they can't provide any proof, then maybe you should choose a different support vendor, because you really want somebody who really understands the software. Okay, that usually means choosing somebody who is helping in the development of the software. Proprietary extensions, as I mentioned, selling of add-ons. This is again quite a common model for getting revenue out of free software. You start with a free base package to gain market share. Then you have add-ons for some business critical functionality. Not all licenses allow this. Some free software licenses don't allow this to happen. Of course, if you started the project yourself, you would deliberately choose, if this is your business model, you would deliberately choose a license that allows proprietary add-ons. But if you're taking an existing project, you would have to be certain that the license allows for it. And so, for example, the licenses that I choose on my free software projects don't allow people to have proprietary add-ons, because I don't want that type of thing to happen. I want the software I produce to remain as free software and be used as free software. Other people have a different attitude and are happy for there to be proprietary add-ons. One of the better known ones is the Mambo content management system. It has a lot of proprietary add-ons done often by the developers of the software, new templates, new search systems, new mail integration systems, etc. And it's got quite a thriving business around the proprietary add-ons for Mambo, and now of course with Joomla, which is a fork of the Mambo system. Okay, dual licensing. This again is a common way of making money out of free software, and it relies on your customers not liking FOSS, which is rather strange, isn't it? It's a way of making money out of FOSS by relying on other people not liking free software. Okay? And it works because some companies have an aversion to free software for various reasons. And so they might decide that to use the free software but to buy a commercial license because they want to do something with the free software that is in violation of the free software license. This is sometimes known as a GPL inoculation, right? Buying an inoculation against the conditions of the GNU General Public License. And in this case, the vendor, the person who's writing the software, might deliberately choose the GPL because it doesn't allow particular things, and then sell people an alternative license that allows those things. The best examples of these two is ones we've already discussed, which is the MySQL database and the Trolltech Qt library. But there's lots of other examples of this as well.
Haven't Nokia got Qt now?
Sorry? Yes, Nokia has now bought Qt, and they've now released it under it's now about a quad license. It's under several different licenses. The main two licenses now are both the GPL and the LGPL. and they're releasing it to make it available under the lesser GPL, happened just in March of this year, I believe. And so that means that the revenue model of selling inoculations for the GPL is really gone now, because now it's available under the lesser GPL. Of course, you don't need an inoculation for linking it to your application. And so Nokia is taking it down a different path. And they're probably interested because they mostly want to use QT in the development of Nokia devices, and they're less interested in the GPL inoculation business model. And so it's no longer an important part. Instead, they want it to be widely used and developed. To encourage more developers to contribute, they've broadened the license terms. Yeah? So it's sort of the priorities of companies can change over time. Or in that particular case, the original developer, Trolltech, got bought out by Nokia, and Nokia has a different set of business priorities, and they may change the license or change their method of making money out of the FOSS product. Okay, advertising. The web economy. This has really happened since the start of the web advertising approach. Banner ads, Google's AdSense program, all these other different advertising techniques, and that's really arisen just in the last decade or so. And some FOSS projects are funded purely from advertising. Most of them only make a fairly small amount out of advertising. For example, hobby projects just have a few web ads, and as Michael says, he's yet to make $50 out of his advertising on his site. Some projects can actually make thousands of dollars out of these little web ads. But there is a poster child for this. One free software project, Mozilla Firefox, the web browser that you've been using in the lab. I believe it earned a bit over US $70 million from an advertising search deal with Google in 2007. And that basically is when you use the little Google search to search with Google in the Firefox, each time you do that, Google pays Firefox a small amount of money. Right, I don't know how much per click, probably a cent or two, I have no idea how much it is. But it added up in total to about $70 million that Google paid Firefox. That allows the Firefox Mozilla company to develop Firefox further and pay a large number of developers. You can pay a lot of developers with $70 million, right? And that's how Firefox is largely funded and developed. Plus volunteers as well, but they've got this large income from this search deal. But there is a bit of a question in the community whether this can be sustained, particularly since Google released their own web browser called Chrome, and there's some people who are questioning now whether the level of income to the Mozilla Corporation will continue into the future, and I just don't know the answer to that.
I heard Mitchell Baker from Mozilla talk about that exact thing in 2007. She said that that particular thing is their number one revenue stream far away, but that they are continually approached by companies who desperately want to have the company's button in the toolbar or in the links in the Firefox links for a default install. Right. They've been offered sort of, the truckloads of gold bullion pulling up the front with money to be able to add one button to Firefox. That's right. They've been trying to go la 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 la, not listening. But as the Google things trickles down, they're going to have a harder and harder time resisting that, I think.
That's right. It'll be harder and harder to say no.
Coca-Cola browser. McDonald's browser. Okay.
So this is another one that sometimes happens. You end up with a piece of software that starts out proprietary and later changes to become a free software project. All right? So it starts out as a pure proprietary product and becomes free software later. This is sometimes done on otherwise defunct projects. So sometimes what can happen is that a project starts out as with grand aims to become the number one database or the number one whatever, word processor or something, and aims to make a commercial go of it. They find that they are unable to compete in the market, they're unable to make enough money to pay their developers. So just as they're shutting down, the last thing they do is they might release the code as free software. Why not? If the company's going to shut down anyway, the code might be just deleted, might be gone, they may not be able to sell it to anyone else, why not release it as free software? Why do you think this happens? What is it about programmers that makes this happen?
People inside the company want to see their work.
Yeah. Right. There's something in the psyche of programmers. Programmers like to see their work being used. Programmers develop a personal relationship with their code. It's really common. And so often the the managers in these companies might have been programmers themselves, they might have been the core developers of this project. They don't want to see all their last 10 years' work completely wasted. So they decide that they're going to actually release the code as free software, right, in the hope that it will then survive as a free software project. Right?
And they may also get the support.
They might be able to then sell support for it. They might be able to get more developers. They might change their business model into one of the more FOSS business models, maybe based on advertising or whatever other technique. This has happened to a number of games. This has happened to quite a few projects. It also happens just because the company decides that our business can change to become a more successful business by making the product free software. And the best known example of that is Netscape Navigator. Netscape Navigator absolutely dominated the internet for many years, and they took two steps. The first step was that they decided to release the browser for free, not as free software, no source code, but just released as a free binary. And their market share rocketed up, right? And they found that their business improved as a result, even though they were getting no revenue from actually selling the browser, right? A lot of people were very skeptical about that being successful. It was successful. Next, they then, a few years later, took the next step, which was release the source code for free. Again, a lot of people were very skeptical. They were sure this was disaster and that the company would fold as a result. Right? They're releasing their most valuable asset, they thought. And they thought it would be a complete disaster. In fact, it saved the company again. And Netscape morphed into Mozilla, and that's what Firefox is now, and now they're getting $70 million a year through an advertising search deal. So this is a product which was a poster child of various revolutions in the software industry, went from completely proprietary product to a free product to a free software product, and now is getting their revenue via search advertising. Right? It's quite a change in that history, and the history of that, it's well worth reading through the history of that. And some of the key developers have got blogs up describing the internal discussions of what happened and how it became a free project. If you search for Free the Lizard, internally it was known as a lizard, a Mozilla. And so that's, anyway, if you look for that and search that term, you can find some very good articles on what happened inside Netscape. This is another very famous example. The Blender 3D graphics tool. Blender is a tool for creating advanced 3D graphics for things like movies, animation, right? Creating complete movies inside this 3D animation tool. Extremely sophisticated tool designed for professional animators, right? The company was not doing well. The company sold the product, but they didn't make enough money to support all their developers. So what they did was they said, well, if somebody offers us €100,000, we'll give it to you, right? And what happened was then an appeal was launched within the free software community. €100,000 is a lot of money. That's a couple of $100,000. And a public appeal was launched saying, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a 3D animation program for the free software community? Wouldn't it be great to have this tool available to everyone for free? So an appeal was launched and donations were sought, individual donations, $10, $100, $50, whatever. Huge numbers of people donated, and eventually they managed to collect €100,000 worth of donations. And they bought the software. They bought the source code and released it as free software, and it's now available. If you install Blender, you can go and install it on your Ubuntu systems, you can go and download the source code, and there's now an active developer community, and in fact the software has improved a lot since it's been released. The community is now actively improving it. That started as a completely proprietary project, and it's now one of the most advanced 3D tools available in the free software world. The Interbase database. That was released, it was originally a commercial database by Borland. Borland is a very well-known software house. Used to be better known than they are now. They produced this database system to try to compete with the various other databases like Access Database and others. And it wasn't very commercially successful. So after a while they decided that, well, we weren't able to make a good go of it commercially, let's release it as free software. And so they released it as free software under the MPL license. And it didn't really take off at first. Not many people started contributing. And And Borland, when they first released this free software, they said that they were going to continue enhancing it and developing it, but they didn't really do that very much. But what happened was a fork of the project was created by the free software community called Firebird. And Firebird is still based on that original source code, and that is now actively developed as a free software project. And in fact, I know a number of places around Canberra that are running Firebird as a high-quality SQL database server, and it's fully free software, based upon that original release from Borland. Yep?
NPL?
Oh, Mozilla Public License. The MPL is Mozilla Public License. It's an interesting license. It was originally created by the Mozilla project for the release of the Netscape source code. And it's a bit like the GPL, except it has a clause where the originator of the project, in that case Mozilla, has special privileges. So when you contribute back, Mozilla gets the right to do more things than other people. So it's an uneven, it's not a balanced license where everyone has the same rights. There are additional rights for a particular entity named in the license. And it's a little bit controversial. Some people are put off contributing to projects that have licenses like that. But it is also quite popular with companies who aren't quite sure what direction the code's going to go, and they want to be able to have some additional level of control beyond what they might get with a more traditional free software license. Okay, it also relates to some of the contracts that Mozilla had with other companies who supplied private plugins and meeting the obligations of those contracts. It gets a bit complex. OpenOffice.org, the word processor that I'm using to display this presentation. You're all familiar with running of OpenOffice, I guess? Everyone used OpenOffice? Yep? Okay. OpenOffice.org started off as a company called StarOffice in Germany. They were trying to create a word processor to compete with Microsoft Word and other word processors. The company was called Star Division, and they created a product called StarOffice. And it was quite a decent product. I remember at one stage the Department of Computer Science here was evaluating the commercial version of StarOffice from Star Division, so whether they should use it on departmental desktops. It was reasonably popular on Unix systems, but it never was a big commercial success. They didn't make enough money. Then in 1999, Sun Microsystems bought Star Division. They paid $25 million US from memory. So for $25 million US, they bought the whole company, and they released StarOffice as free software, right, which created OpenOffice. But they have this dual system where they have the StarOffice variant, which is the commercial variant sold by Sun, and they have the free variant OpenOffice that is released under a normal open source license. And most of the developers of OpenOffice StarOffice still work for Sun, but there are also contributions from other people in the community. And there's this funny dichotomy between the free and the commercial version. Okay? So that's major examples of stuff that's been re-released. This is some common mistakes. Now we're actually into lunchtime. This is a very important slide. We might actually move this slide. It's the last slide of this talk, but it will take quite a while to discuss it. Basically it's about if a company wants to make contributions to FOSS projects, what are the common mistakes? What do companies normally do wrong? So think about that over lunch, and after lunch during the lecture we'll come back to this slide, but think a bit about what could companies do wrong? What could they do to poison their interactions with the free software community? What could they do to wreck their chances of a successful free software project? Because almost every possible thing that could be done wrong has been done wrong at some stage. And if you're going to do it, you need to know those mistakes to learn from the past. Okay, enjoy your lunch.